You're all very welcome here to the annual event of the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence. It's a pleasure to have you all here. It's great to see such a big attendance. We have a very interesting day ahead, including the launch of our paper this year in relation to the post-2015 framework and what we think should be in there. And we're hoping that you'll participate in a lively discussion afterwards. The Consortium, the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence, is a group of 15 organisations: human rights, development, humanitarian, Irish aid and the Defence Forces. And it's unique in the world. It carries out very special work collectively in relation to ensuring that gender-based violence is very much mainstreamed and very much understood and implemented in our programming work, that we share our learning and practice and what we can bring back from our field work, and also that we continue to influence policy and push out policy and ensure that that helps to deliver greater impact in relation to working on this very, very key issue. Just to start, I'd like to say that today we're missing a really great friend of the consortium. Some of you may know Inez McCormack. She has chaired this meeting and indeed the earlier meeting that we had with CEOs of the consortium every year for the last several years since we began. And she has been an inspiration to us all. And unfortunately, Inez is very ill. So we send our best wishes to her, and also to say that we're dedicating today's event and indeed our future work in relation to the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and particularly this post-2015 work that we're going to be talking about today, to Inez. During the year, as chair of the consortium, I'm also the CEO of Oxfam, and I've had a great opportunity during the year to visit some of our gender-based violence programming and witness just what you can achieve if you really focus on this issue and if you invest your resources in it too. It does have to be not just about talking about it, but also ensuring that you put your resources behind it, and even in times when resources are constrained, it has to be a key focus. I saw in Tanzania how you can mobilize hundreds of thousands of people to stand up and say, we will no longer accept violence against women, both men and women. And it's critical that we include and involve and engage with men in this process. It can't be just about women speaking to each other. But we can make huge change happen when we encourage everybody to participate and to really understand this issue and to speak out loud about it and not to be shy. But then I also unfortunately saw in Hyderabad in India, this is a modern city with all the big multinationals, but when you go down into the slums, you meet women's groups that we have worked with, and you see just the obscene nature of some of the behaviour and some of the violence that's been carried out on women and girls. And this is in a country that is emerging, that has very progressive laws in relation to prevention and dealing with this issue. But sadly, the implementation does not match what unfortunately is the reality of custom and practice. So we have a long way to go in the 21st century. We know that the Millennium Goal deadline of 2015 is fast approaching. There have been a number of major achievements, including those made on education, on health, on access to clean water, but there are several others lagging behind. Gender-based violence is a gross manifestation of gender inequality. It's a human rights violation, and it's a major impediment to development. We know some of the appalling statistics of the prevalence and the impact of this violence against women has not just on women, but on families and by extension on communities. We also know that the original MDGs, as we're currently working with, had no reference to gender-based violence at all. So today's event and the paper that we've produced and the work that we're intending to carry out over the next number of years as the framework is being considered and designed will really focus on ensuring that gender-based violence itself is writ large in the new development goals, whatever they might look like, and to ensure that gender rights and gender justice are very strong in there too. So we have a great panel of experts and inspirational speakers. So I'm going to start with Nora Owen. She's currently chair of the Irish Aid Expert Advisory Group which led the review of the Irish White Paper recently, and I understand that the publication of that review will be due any day soon. Nora is also chair of the Justice Group of the Irish Institute of International and European Affairs. She's been a politician in Ireland for many years, including being appointed as Deputy Leader of the Fine Gael Party and holding the position of Minister for Justice. She has a keen interest in women's rights and is very well positioned to speak on the issue due to her previous and current roles. I'd like you to welcome Nora Owen.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, friends all. When Jim started by saying if there was anybody worried about being caught on camera, thought he was making an allusion to my previous job as Minister for Justice, in case he thought I still had contacts to report people. Fellow panellists, it's a great honour indeed, and many thanks for the invitation to speak here today at this annual public event. I've been here before at these events, and as Jim has said, we know that gender-based violence is a major abuse of human rights, which impacts primarily on women and girls, but also on a lesser number, but nonetheless a significant number of boys and men. And it impacts in rich and poor countries, north and south of the equator, in peace times as well as conflict. And as such, it should be an issue of concern for all of us. The issue of gender equality has always been close to my own heart, and I have a strong personal commitment to ensuring that gender equality is at the heart of our overseas development programme. And if I may just divert for a minute to say that my very first visit to a developing country at that time was as far back as 1981, when I went to the Philippines under the auspices of TROCRA, and I'm delighted to see Sally O'Neill here, whom I haven't met for many years. And it opened my eyes to what we were, I suppose, the benefits that Ireland was gaining with regard to women's rights, although slow as they were, and what I saw in the Philippines and subsequently in other countries. I'd like to just take a little opportunity to talk about my role as chairperson of the Irish Aid Expert Advisory Group, whose role is to offer independent advice to the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Minister of State for Overseas Development on the aid programme. The world has changed considerably since the government's white paper in 2006, and of course it's imperative that the government anyway reflects, evaluates and looks forward to ensure that Ireland's overseas aid programme, which we're all proud of, remains effective, innovative and continues to make a difference in the lives of the world's poorest people. Between January and April 2012, I chaired a series of public consultations in Cork, Sligo, Limerick and Dublin, as well as a meeting in Malawi with all our representatives from all our programme countries, and with meetings with the Oireachtas, with civil society, with the private sector and with the diaspora groups. Among the many written submissions, over 160 received, was one from the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence, for which I thank you. A wide range of issues came up during those consultations, many of which are relevant to our discussions here today. First of all, it was clear that there is a strong support for the Irish Aid programme and for the central tenets of the White Paper on Irish Aid. The support comes from a wide, broad spectrum of stakeholders who welcomed particularly the strong focus on poverty and hunger, the continued commitment to untied aid, and the strong engagement in recent years with civil society. On the minus side, however, different groups highlighted that Ireland has not fulfilled its commitments made in the White Paper on spending levels, and there is a need to strengthen policy coherence across government departments. That came up over and over again. Others pointed to the need for more transparency on aid spending and for a stronger focus on measuring and communicating results. There were strong calls for Irish Aid to ensure that a human rights-based approach underpins the programme. The importance of addressing the issue of gender equality, including gender-based violence, emerged consistently across the consultations, many times from many of the missionary orders that attended the consultations. Key issues including getting and keeping more girls in primary and secondary schools, supporting the role of women in decision-making, both in communities and and at all levels of government, ensuring access to maternal and reproductive health, and supporting the economic empowerment of women, including issues such as equal access to land. The importance of addressing GBV in particular was, as I say, a consistent issue across the consultations, emerging both as a form of human rights abuse, but also to look at the needs to address the health, economic and social consequences of GBV. There were calls for the implementation of Ireland's National Action Plan on the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which was launched at this event last year. And so all in all, the messages emerging were clear and consistent. Addressing gender equality, women's empowerment, combating GBV are fundamental to our commitment to poverty alleviation and to human rights. I would consider that the Irish Aid Programme to date has demonstrated a consistent commitment to gender equality, and the issue of GBV has received a particular focus in recent years because of this consortium's work. I look forward with some confidence that these commitments will continue to be reflected in the new policy document which Jim has mentioned, which will be published arising from the public consultations last year very soon. But we're here today to consider how gender-based violence should be reflected in any post-2015 development framework. Let's just pause for a moment and reflect on the MDGs and what has been achieved to date. They have led to significant progress on poverty reduction in many countries. They have provided the international community with a clear set of targets and goals. They've given a focus to what aid should be used for, and because they're easy to communicate to the public, they have galvanised political support. Development results in the last 10 years have been the best ever recorded. Maybe we need to reflect on those because so often it's just the bad news, the bad statistics. Between 2005 and 2010, the total number of poor people around the world fell by nearly 500 million. Millions of child deaths have been avoided thanks to greater access to vaccines. 40 million more children are going to school today than at the turn of the millennium. When the world came together in 2000 to agree on what the 8 shared global priorities should be, gender equality and women's empowerment was one of those goals. MDG 3 was a significant achievement, and we must not forget this. We know that we have a battle on our hands to keep these issues of women's empowerment and gender equality at the heart of the post-2015 framework. MDG 3 has been a powerful advocacy tool over the last decade and has strengthened political commitment and momentum. And as I say, there has been progress. The most recent MDG report states that parity in enrolment rates between girls and boys in primary schools across the developing world has now been achieved. Women continue to gain representation in parliaments. The pace is slow, but we do know there have been improvements. By the end of January 2012, women accounted for 19.7% of parliamentarians worldwide. This amounts to a nearly 75% increase since 1995, when women held 11.3% as worldwide. Now, I am not praising these figures, believe me, but they at least are on the upward trend. But despite these progresses on MDG 3 and on other MDGs, the global targets and results have hidden inequalities across regions and countries. Vital issues such as sustainable growth, job creation, trade and protecting the environment were not well addressed. A one-size-fits-all approach gave the impression that problems and solutions are the same everywhere. Clearly, they are not. In 2012, almost 1 billion women, men and children continue to be hungry and live in extreme poverty. Maternal mortality levels remain shockingly high. There are indeed more children in school, but the quality of that education is still a major concern. And although there's parity between boys and girls at primary school level, does not exist at secondary school level, and it's a long way off. Climate change is contributing to an increased frequency of disasters in affected countries, so progress that's made slips back very quickly. Gender inequality persists stubbornly, and we know that women continue to face discrimination in access to education, to work and economic assets, as well as in decision-making at all levels of society and in the home. Which brings me to the issue of violence against women. This has undermined efforts to reach the MDGs and is a pervasive global abuse of human rights. Let's call it what it is. Despite the progress in getting more girls into school, a key issue which restricts girls' access to education, and particularly at secondary level, is gender-based violence. The simple fact, ladies and gentlemen, is that for many girls, school is not a safe place for them to learn. Indeed, the journey to and from school also brings risks. GBV is a key risk factor in the transmission of HIV. Violence undermines women's capacity to negotiate safe sex or to leave partners who are abusive. There is evidence that GBV impacts on maternal mortality, which still remains unacceptably high, as does child mortality. And it also impacts on the economic stability of the family through lost work, which in turn affects food security and increases hunger, because predominantly women are the producers of the food and the providers of fuel and sustenance for their families. GBV affects women's role in decision-making. Their voices are not heard in the debates and conversations which affects their lives at home and in the community. And these are conversations to which women have valuable contributions to make. And we know that here in Ireland, the changes that have come about because women's voices are more readily heard. Whether that dialogue is how to mitigate the impacts of climate change, how to improve agricultural productivity, or what is best for children in the family, those voices need to be heard at all levels. There are 3 years left to accelerate progress on the MDGs, while the process of reflecting on what should follow them has already commenced. In March next, the UN Commission on the Status of Women, which is the key global policy forum, will focus on the issue of, and I quote, the elimination and prevention of all forms of violence against women and girls. It's very important that the Consortium and all of the members here today and elsewhere begin the process now of reflecting on the progress made in respect of the MDGs and what will come after 2015. There are a couple of key points that I just want to run through that we must keep in mind. GBV must be placed within the context of a human rights framework, such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Whatever comes after MDGs will need to address the issues of power and the structural issues within all our societies which reinforce gender inequality and discrimination, such as property ownership and women's role in decision-making. I endorse the calls of the Consortium here for a specific goal on gender equality and women's empowerment post-2015. Let nobody tell you that the agenda has been delivered. It is not yet delivered, and we need to ensure that post-2015 there need to be special indicators on gender-based violence and the integration of gender equality across the new framework. I understand that one of the challenges will be the limited availability of credible data. But it's important that this is not used as an excuse, ladies and gentlemen, not to include an indicator. Experience from the framework already has been that the political will underpinning the framework has been a strong driver and motivation to improve data collection, research and analysis. These are now very important issues that are gaining more momentum in many of the discussions on development improvement. It should be the same for GBV. Agreement about the inclusion of a reliable indicator on GBV should initiate a drive to get better data and analysis. As we move towards the 2015 deadline, it's critical that we engage, as Jim has said, men and boys in this dialogue, whether that is the NGOs working at community level, whether it's with religious and traditional leaders, or governments engaging political leaders at national and international levels. Leadership from those in positions of power, men and women, will be critical to bringing political will and momentum to this issue. The output is important, but the process leading to the new post-2015 framework is also important. So if the voices that need to be heard aren't heard in the process, then the process is not working properly. The engagement of the women's organisations is critical. We need to ensure their voices at all levels are heard. Broader civil society organisations, many of whom are here today, need to prioritise the issue of gender equality and GBV, whether your focus is on the human rights side, the development cooperation, or humanitarian assistance. Faith-based organisations too have a critical role to play in engaging faith communities. I just want to stress that we all have a responsibility, and it shouldn't be left to the kind of groups that we normally think about. As I say, faith-based organisations have a very crucial role. We need to avoid looking at women as a homogenous group and consider how GBV impacts on the lives of different groups of women, such as disabled women, migrant women, older women, the travelling community here in Ireland. Poverty, deprivation, low levels of education, war, conflict, all of these contribute and exacerbate GBV. But we know that violence against women occurs in all cultures and in all countries in many different circumstances. There's no way for complacency in this country because we see ourselves as a developed country. It's a complex issue which has at its heart norms, values and stereotypes which discriminate against and undermine women. I'd like to take this opportunity to quickly reflect a little on what we've learned here in Ireland that might be of use in the discussions post-2015. Much has changed for Ireland over the last 50 years. The women's rights movement became increasingly active during the 1960s, and I think there are some people in this room who will remember those years well. Women demanded more equality, free secondary education opened up new opportunities, large numbers of women began to attend universities and other third-level institutions. The workplace began to change. Women no longer had to give up their jobs when they were in the civil service, when they got married. And a lot of legislative reform was introduced on equal pay, employment, social welfare. In 1985, the Health Family Planning Amendment Act was passed, legalising the sale of contraceptives to anyone over 18. For the younger people in the audience, that sounds so antiquated now, but that was a big move at that time. On the issue of gender-based violence, new legislation on rape was enacted in May 1981, and marital rape became an offence in 1990, followed by the Domestic Violence Act in 1996, amended in 2002. Funding increased for voluntary agencies, and the report on the Task Force on Violence Against Women contained proposals for a more coordinated and coherent and integrated response covering these services. So we can conclude that there has been significant progress in Ireland from a political, policy and legislative perspective. But despite these actions, the challenge of changing people's attitudes remains, as well as the continuing prevalence of violence against women. So despite all those changes at policy and legislation, as I say, the work is not finished. A recent survey by Women's Aid reported that 1 in 7 women in Ireland have experienced severe abuse, defined, and I quote, a pattern of physical, emotional or sexual behaviours between partners in an intimate relations, end of quote. And more than 4 in 10, that's 42%, some form of sexual abuse or assault had happened in their lifetime. On the other side, a recent survey by CUSC, the National Office for the Prevention of Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence, finds that 96% agree that abuse in the domestic context is a criminal offence. That's heartening progress, because that figure would not have been as high many years ago. People didn't see domestic violence as a crime, really. It was between a man and a woman, and you shouldn't interfere. And even the Gardaí didn't call if they got a complaint. It is clear that although the dynamics, pace and direction of change will vary across countries and cultures, there are some insights from Ireland's experiences which can be shared. Equal access to quality education, good maternal and reproductive health are the foundations of equality. Legislative and policy reform is critical. Undoubtedly, our membership of the EU were key junctures in the progress in these legislative reforms. The women's movement has played a critical role driving change in Ireland from the bottom up, just as the women's organisations in many developing countries are key drivers to change. In conclusion, I'd like to commend the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence for organising this event and for its continued work since its establishment in 2004. It's very positive, and Jim has highlighted this, to see civil society organisations and the government working together inside the consortium. That's quite rare, ladies and gentlemen, in a constructive way on such a critical issue. Usually there's the group and then there's the government, and they come and listen to what you have to say at some stage. In this instance, they're sitting around the table together. I know that the consortium will continue to work together in this way over the next few years as we move towards the deadline for MDGs and develop a new global agreement to build a world where all human beings, men and women, can live lives free of want, of fear and of violence. Thank you very much.